The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
The National Weather Service has issued a severe thunderstorm warning.
Welcome to the Common Sense Practical Prepper Podcast, where prepping doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. Coming to you from a well-defended off-grid compound high in the mountains. Coming to you from his Florida room in Richmond, Virginia. Neither off-grid nor well-defended, unless you count as chickens and cats. Here is your host, Keith.
Hey folks, this is Keith with the Common Sense Practical Prepper Podcast, July 16th, 2025. So this podcast might be a little heavy, so might be a little bit of politics sprinkled into it. So if you don't want a heavy podcast or you don't want to hear about politics, not a lot, but a little, you can go ahead and turn this off and turn on Netflix or whatever you were doing before you decided to listen to this. But I will keep the politics to a minimum, but I think it's rather important, something I've been thinking about most of the day. I actually made some show notes. I actually wrote down some notes here, so hopefully I don't get lost. All right, who is the real concern? Who am I, or who am I concerned about, either individuals, groups, or a country when it comes to an SHTF situation? Now, again, I prep as a hedge against inflation. I do not prep for the zombie apocalypse. I don't necessarily prep for societal decay where we got bands of vandals and thieves running through neighborhoods taking everybody's food and water, although that's certainly a possibility. So this is what I'm concerned with geopolitically. I'm kind of worried about China. Now, China has a policy, a well-documented, published policy that they want to destroy the U.S. They want to become the number one world superpower, both economically and militarily. You can look this up online. I believe one of the websites is Present Danger China, and they actually come out and spell out what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So we know there's plenty of Chinese spies, and one of the largest conduits for Chinese spies are university students coming from China and attending university here in the United States. Mathematics, science, nuclear physics, all sorts of things. Now, when they come across, they have an obligation, they have a duty, they take like an oath that when they come to the States and they go to university, that they are to observe and report back anything of relevance that they find. So they're spies. They're all spies to an extent. Okay, they're not like super James Bond kind of spies, but at the very least, if they get accepted into a program that has some sensitive information, sensitive material, sensitive processes, they are to report back to the motherland. Or is that Germany? Anyway, they're supposed to report back to the motherland of what they have found. So why do we allow so many Chinese students to come on visas and attend our universities? Well, it's because our politicians are corrupt. And I don't need to go into any more detail really than that. These folks are paid off. The universities are paid off. Everybody's getting rich by bringing the Chinese students over to the United States. Again, not every single one of them is a super James Bond spy. Don't get me wrong. Don't think that's what I'm saying. But they're obligated to report back to China on what they've seen. Some see nothing. Some see a lot. Some eventually get caught, and then they get deported. Let's talk about Russia. Am I really worried about Russia? And I'm not. I'm not an expert on Soviet doctrine or Russian doctrine, although I've been to Moscow. And let me tell you briefly about my trip to Moscow. Moscow is a very dirty city. It is very run down. It is very busy. The apartments, the older apartments from like pre-Cold War, are falling apart. Now, there are modern skyscrapers, there are modern buildings, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, it is a very impoverished and a very rundown city. Now, prior to the wall coming down in the fall of '99, much of the world didn't really know what went on behind the Iron Curtain. Once the wall came down, everybody in the world, including U.S. intelligence assets, got a glimpse behind the Iron Curtain, and they were not impressed. All of the bravado and the blustering and everything that the Soviet presidents and premiers had was just exactly that. A lot of their military equipment was in disarray, very disorganized. The country is absolutely enormous, and they weren't as tough in real life as we thought they were. I was in East Berlin about 8 months before the wall came down, and that's a whole different story. I can talk about that for hours. But going into East Berlin from West Berlin was like watching your favorite color movie, and as you walked into East Berlin, you slowly turned the dial and made your color movie into black and white. All the buildings were the same. There were 4 or 5 different cars, 3 or 4 different colors, and it was a very bland city. And you can tell that nobody wanted to talk to the folks from the West. They were afraid. And again, I can tell stories about my trip in East Berlin, but I'll save you that story. So I don't think Russia is our main concern or our main enemy. Talk about the Middle East. Iran, or Iran mostly, I think it's Iran, is probably at this point, that and the terrorists in Syria and Afghanistan, they're probably a fairly big concern for us. Again, depending on who you listen to, the United States government is back in bed with the Syrian government, regime change, Gaddafi, the whole nine. It's all coming back probably to bite us in the butt. But without another forever war or the industrial military complex here in the United States getting their hand into it, a lot of people are not going to become more rich than they already are. I think our government is playing both sides of the fence. Good guy, bad guy, here's some money. Don't do this, don't do that. And I think, in my opinion, as far as forever wars and forever conflict, there are certain alphabet agencies feed off of that. And I think that's just how it is, and that's how it's going to be for an awfully long time. Again, it goes back to all the corruption in D.C., and I don't think that is going to change anytime soon or ever. So who is, in my opinion, our biggest concern? If it's not China, if it's not Russia, if it's not all the shenanigans in the Middle East, what am I concerned about? Who do I think the enemy is? And here's a newsflash. I believe we here in the United States are our own worst enemy. Division, dissension, fractured relationships between races of people. A revolution will come down from a well-planned, concerted effort to destabilize the U.S. population. I believe there are entities, there are departments, there are alphabet agencies that are out there. One of their goals is to keep us upset with our neighbor, with the guy or the gal across the street. African Americans, white people, Hispanic people. I think there is a lot of dissension and division that is ginned up, that is driven by a lot of propaganda and a lot of misinformation. I bet you if all that crap was to stop, 99% of the U.S. population would get along just fine with everybody else. But you listen to the news, you see the news stories, the sound bites, some of the stuff coming out of alleged community leaders or politicians is absolutely insane. It's like we're living in bizarro world. Some of the things that they're saying, some of the stuff they're saying is so over the top that even someone who is part of that particular party or believes this particular congressman, congresswoman, senator, there is no way that they can actually go along with some of the stuff they're saying. Now, I believe us being in a permanent state of chaos serves the purpose of some of these entities or alphabet agencies to try to keep everybody off guard, everybody off balance, everybody looking over their shoulder. What's that guy doing? What's my neighbor doing? Oh, this political group did this. They're protesting that. I think all of that is just to keep everybody off balance a little bit and not to be able to concentrate on what's important. You talk about interest rates, the economy, inflation, tariffs. All of this stuff is to keep everybody busy with a bunch of little things and not have the time or put forth the effort to concentrate on really what is important to this particular family or to that particular person or that particular company. Okay, let's look at, I believe that there are certain entities within the U.S. government that one of their goals is to create permanent dependent class of people, a certain percentage of the population that will always be looking to the government for assistance, to be looking to government for a handout. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe 110% that we should take care of those that are truly in need. Let me tell you a police officer story back in the day. When I was a police officer, I went to a house, I had a backup unit with me, and I can't remember why we were there initially. But in making the report, I had to get identification from this young lady, early 20s maybe. And, your name, is this where you live, your address, your phone number, your social security number, what do you do for a living? And she was, to me, seemed able-bodied. And I said, well, where do you work? She says, well, I'm disabled. I asked, well, what is your disability? Now, in 2025, I'd probably get in trouble, or a police officer would probably get in trouble with asking that question, because she seemed like she was all there to me. Wasn't missing any arms or legs, and she was very articulate. It didn't appear to have any disabilities in that sense. So I said, what do you mean disabled? She goes, well, I have a really bad memory. And I'm thinking, oh, traumatic brain injury. She goes, well, I tried to work at McDonald's once, and by the time the person gave me their order and I was punching it into the register, I completely forgot. So I can't work. I've worked at McDonald's. Maybe things have changed, but when they say Big Mac, you put your finger on the little button of a photograph or an icon of a Big Mac. You want a Coke, you hit a Coke. And that really kind of threw me for a loop. She couldn't remember things 10 or 15 seconds later. Didn't quite understand that. She said she was disabled. She was drawing disability. Again, I believe we should take care of folks that are truly in need. Now, are there folks gaming the system? Absolutely 100%. And if this is a situation where she was truly disabled, I know folks that have true disabilities. I know people that would definitely, in my opinion, qualify, some folks very close to me that would qualify for some sort of disability, whatever it might be. But these folks go out and work. They do their damnedest, be a productive member of society. A particular young lady I know would not want to sit at home all day. She's very passionate about what she does, and she's very into what she does, whereas she could probably get some sort of disability, push comes to shove, but she's not going to do that. Okay, she is going to go out and be productive. She is going to give back to society. She's going to give back to the folks that she works with in at this particular job. So kudos to her. I might be getting slightly off track here, but I believe there's a dependent class. There's folks that to be constantly coddled and receive benefits, whatever you want to call it, from the government, when actually they can be out there being productive. I'm not saying they're going to go out and cure cancer, but they can go out and get a job. There are plenty of jobs out there. Let's talk about the education system. They no longer teach shop classes. They no longer teach economics, home studies. They no longer teach you how to balance a checkbook, whereas probably in this modern era, I learned how to balance a checkbook from my parents, and in high school, I guess now if they taught it, it would be how to do an app or how to look at your bank app on your phone and enter in, what's going on and try to balance that. But they don't teach that anymore. It all comes back to a dependent class. You see them, especially folks here in the States, you have seen them shuffling through Walmart in their pajama bottoms and their fuzzy slippers, staring at their cell phone, banging into things because they have that electronic leash, and that's all they know is their TikToks and their videos and their Instagrams and their Facebooking or whatever they do. That's how we communicate now. We communicate through text messages. We don't look people in the eye. We don't write letters. We send email. We take the personalization out of everything, good or bad. Technology has provided us the ability to communicate around the world via text, via email, via Skype, if we still have Skype, WhatsApp, instantaneously around the world. So we're creating a a generation of zombies. For the most part, there are people that break out of that and do very well for themselves. But again, you see them and you know who I'm talking about. Now, folks that are listening to this abroad, maybe it's not as bad in your country, but you can look up videos. What's it called? People of Walmart or Weirdos of Walmart. Those people exist. I don't know if any of those are staged or not. I've seen some pretty scary things in Walmart. We talk about high school. Here in the United States, if you take all the high schools and you lump them all together, the graduation rate is approximately 80%. Some cities, it's 85%. In Northern Virginia, in Fairfax County, it's 96%. In Richmond, Virginia, in the city of Richmond, it's like 78. In the suburbs, it jumps to like 85, almost 90% graduation rate. A lot of these kids are getting pushed through. A lot of these kids, I don't think they fail people anymore. I had a young man when I was a senior. He was like 22 years old. I was 18. He had flunked like 5 different times. I don't know if he finally aged out and they got tired of it and they just kicked him out of the school or what. But he was like a senior 5 times over because he just refused to do the work. He just sat there and was just a big lump, and they did not push him through like they do now. Since 2020, from 2020 to 2021, which is the latest stats I could find, in that 21-year period, there was a 95% increase in the amount of principals and staff that support the principal in public schools. There was a 40% increase in like assistant principals and other administrators, whatever they call someone under the assistant to the assistant principal. There was only a 10% increase in the number of teachers and only a 5% increase in the amount of students. So look what they've done in that 22-year period, 95%. So the schools are super, super top heavy on administrators, folks that probably have taught before, some have not, but they're so top heavy that the policies and the curriculum and all the teachings are coming down from this very top-loaded, bloated educational system, and they're not thinking about the kids. I believe that there are certain entities that don't like folks that are independent, that don't like folks that are free thinkers. They don't like folks that are self-resilient. They don't like folks that potentially live off grid. Those people don't pay taxes. They can't be tracked as closely as those who have cell phones, who are tied to the grid, who go to work every day, who have internet, cell service. But I think that it's a lot of these programs and the generation of zombies, if you will, all about control. And again, that's 20 other podcasts I could talk about for hours. But I think that as long as they have these people that are being dependent on them, they're pretty much going to do what this particular political party wants them to do. They're not going to be self-critical. They're not going to be critical thinkers. They're not going to question the status quo. Recently here in the United States, if you choose to speak out, you're called a bigot, you're called a racist, or even worse at times. There is nothing wrong with exercising your First Amendment right. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't agree with the policy about X, Y, and Z. That doesn't mean you're not patriotic. That doesn't mean you don't like this country. That just means you're exercising your First Amendment right by saying, hey, DC, I don't like the fact that you're doing this. I think my tax dollars should not go to that. I think it should be better spent on healthcare for veterans or higher education or shop classes or trade schools. The fact that someone can shout you down and call you names, it's basically saying, sit down, be quiet. We don't want to hear from you. Wrapping this all up, if I'm able to do that after however long I've been rambling on, I think the enemy is from within. I think that this is going to lead to more division and more fractured relationships between family members, between community members, between different races, different sexes, whatever it happens to be. I think that is the real fear that I have, is the fact that there are people that don't want us to get along. They profit both power-wise and financially by keeping everybody mad at each other. So that's why I always end my podcast with be safe out there, take care of one another, and until next time. Because again, we all bleed red. Here in the United States, we're American citizens. Most of us are very patriotic. Most of us would give our shirt off our back to the next person, to a stranger, if someone is in need. But I really think that if something is going to happen, it's going to be the genesis of the spark is going to be the continued division that is being driven, the wedges that are being driven between people, neighbors, whomever it happens to be. And there are people that actually believe that is the way to go. And that's how we should, we should live, being upset and angry and divisive, because then again, we're not paying attention to what's really going on. All right, folks, thank you for listening to this ramble. If you've made it this far, you get a gold star. And as always, be careful out there, take care of one another, and until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Common Sense Practical Prepper Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, help spread the word by leaving a rating and review.